And I want to welcome Dr. Paul Beck. He is a retired professor of political science at Ohio State, and he got his PhD from Michigan. So it's great to have him here. You can hear him often on the radio. He is somebody that is interviewed about the political landscape. So it's a real privilege to have him presenting to us and leading a discussion. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Beck.
Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming to listen to more about politics. Some people, my wife, for example, doesn't want to hear anything more about politics. So she always turns the radio off in the car. But I'm eager to hear what the latest is. Although the truth is, the latest is usually the same, right? Not much has changed, just like what drinking from a fire hose, I think they say, with something new every day to sink your teeth into. Well, what I thought I would do is try to bring us sort of up to date as to where we are politically. But I'm going to start that by talking about where we were just, what was it, 10 months ago, at the end of the election cycle in November. It was a very close election, though we don't tend to remember that, I don't think. And the number I like to play with is well, two numbers really. One is that Trump did not achieve a majority of the popular vote. He came very close. He hadn't achieved a majority in his previous runs. Here he was at 49.8%, which is about as close as you can get. But if 232,000 votes had changed from Trump to Harris in 3 states, she would be president. So it was that close. Now it's the privilege of winners to claim mandates, right? And I think every president who has won the election since I've been around and paid attention to these things has claimed that they have received a mandate from the voters. The truth is, voters are motivated by a whole variety of things. And so there's probably no mandate to be had out there. But that didn't stop President Trump from claiming a mandate and then acting upon that. And what we've seen in the last 8 months is a lot of activity on behalf of that quote mandate, end quote. I also want to start by talking about partisanship. And by partisanship, I mean people who identify as either Democrats or Republicans. There are a lot of ways to measure this. These are typically measures that come from surveys. And ask people, the famous question, which comes from, quote, Michigan, end quote, is generally speaking, do you think of yourself as a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or what? And most people answer either Republican or Democrat. That's gone down in recent years. There are more so-called independents today. Now, what does that mean? It depends on the state. In Ohio, if you don't vote in primaries, you are classified as unaffiliated. Once you vote in the primary, you're moved over into the party column in which primary or in whose primary you have voted. But other states don't do it that way. You have to register in a particular party. And often you don't, the minute you change your mind about party, you don't march downtown and re-register. And so a lot of those registrations are lasting over a period of years, even though people really change their minds about what party they are supporting. But having said that, it turns out that partisans, Democrats and Republicans, about 2/3 of the electorate, vote party. And they vote party more heavily in presidential contests than they do in other contests. There often are people that they know in the neighborhood who are of the other party and they want to go ahead and vote for them. And so they'll break their vote that way. That's less true today than it used to be. But there are also more people who are calling themselves independents today than there used to be. They also turn out at higher rates. Partisans are a major portion of the electorate, particularly in presidential years. that turnout goes down. It goes down by about a third in these midterm contests. And of course, who fails to vote in the midterm, what voted in the presidential year really matters. And in the presidential year of 2024, there was a surge of turnout on the Republican side. Some people who had never voted before ended up voting in the Republican, or voted Republican in the general election. And that really made a difference. It probably carried Trump into the White House, in fact, though it's sometimes hard to estimate that. And I'm showing you, go to the next slide there. Maybe go back a slide. Well, go 2 slides.
Yeah.
Keep going. There we go. Okay. I wanted to show you how balanced the country is between Democrats and Republicans. These are registered voters in surveys that are conducted by the Pew Center in Philadelphia. Very high quality polls. Even though polls these days are more questionable than they used to be, because fewer people are willing to respond, certainly over the telephone. Most pollsters have given up on telephone interviews, by the way, because we could very quickly tell where they're coming from and just don't answer them. And so more and more of them are using other ways I think are probably in some cases pretty good. In other cases, not so good, which means that when you hear results from polls, what you need to do is pay attention to who the pollster is, who they are polling for, and what are other polls showing. And is that particular poll really out of kilter with the other polls that are being conducted? There are more and more of them. My business over the years has been polling, and not that I've made any money from it, but that's what I've done academically. And the number of polls has just exploded over time. There's a website called realclearpolitics.com that reports very usefully all the polls that have been conducted over a period of time. And you can even click on a particular poll and get the breakdown by demographic groups and other indicators of who has voted which way. And I love those polls. If they were to stop doing that, I don't know what I would do for these talks. So a lot of polling has gone on. A lot of it is tapping partisans more than independents, because independents are less likely to respond even to polls than they are to vote in elections. And as you can see from this figure 1 that's posted here on the screen, I think, the balance between Democrats and Republicans in the polls has been pretty steady over several decades. Steady within what we like to call sampling error. And it really means they're the same, essentially. So the country is balanced between Democrats and Republicans. This year, the reports are that more people are registering as Republicans than as Democrats, by not a large margin necessarily, but it appears in many states to be happening. This is particularly true in the South, as many Southerners, particularly older Southerners, registered as Democrats when they first registered 50 years ago, and then began drifting in a Republican direction, never changing their registration until more recent years, when they have been pushed or persuaded to register with their party of choice. So there's that balance, and you need to bear that in mind, because it means that our elections are very, very close. And a few votes here and there, particularly with the Electoral College for president, can change the outcome, and change the outcome in a very dramatic way. And what we're seeing, by the way, in now 2025, is that being president really matters. Presidents have powerful levers that they can use to advance their particular cause. Some are less inclined to use them, but others are not. And we're seeing a president now who really wants to use all the levers of power that he can get his hands on, and even more than that. And many of the things that he's done, and I'll talk about this later on, have been contested in the courts. It is frustrating because the judicial process is slow. And so it will be, the side that feels like it's been disadvantaged will sue. There'll be some time before there is even a hearing before the judges. Then it'll take some time for them to render a verdict. Then there's the right to appeal. They'll appeal to the next level, which in the federal court system is the appellate court level. And then the losing side can appeal, well, either side, but the winners wouldn't, can appeal to the Supreme Court. It takes a while for the Supreme Court to pick up a case. And in fact, most appeals, they do not pick up. Most appeals, they just let stand at whatever that verdict is at that lower court. But it's a process that takes time. I think it's probably still true that most of the suits are still pending. We're still in the middle of that process. And so almost every day you pick up the paper where the court in, I don't know, Southern Texas or Texas has reversed the ruling of the previous, well, they wouldn't do that in Texas, but in some other state, has reversed the ruling of the previous court. And now that's going to be appealed. So it's an elongated process. Probably won't be resolved for another year or so, if even then. It means that you've got to be patient before you really determine or can determine the final result. So there's that balance in terms of partisanship. It's also the case that partisans are more polarized than nonpartisans. And there's a figure 2 that I'm going to have Tom move to. I think it's the next one. Yeah, there it is right there. There are different ways to measure polarization. And the one that I really like is where people are asked, what do you think of your or of the party's candidates for president? And it's asked typically before the election, as close to the election as they could get, the pollsters can get. And then you're asked to rate them on, in this case, a thermometer scale that goes from 0 degrees to 100 degrees. What we've done, or what I've done here, is I've taken the difference between those two ratings. People who are cold towards the opposing party, warm towards their own party. These are registered voters. And what you see there creeping ever higher is the extent to which people are polarized. And polarized means that they typically love their party's candidate and hate the opposition candidate. And you can measure polarization again in a variety of ways. If you were to measure it in terms of 0 degrees versus 100 degrees, that is really liking your party's candidate, really disliking the others. You still get noticeable numbers, but they're lower than the ones that you see projected here, obviously. 30 to 70, I think, is a pretty big split, actually. And you can see that creeping ever higher. I don't have it yet for 2024. My suspicion is, what I've seen from other polls, that it's higher yet, or was higher yet in 2024 than it had been earlier than that. Polarization is important because these are people who hate the opposition, love their candidate, and they are very loyal typically to their candidate. And if you put these two things together, the parity or the evenness in terms of party identifications, as they're called, and polarization, you see an electorate that is very, very deeply divided. And that's where we are right now. I've been giving another talk where I talk about the sources of polarization, and there are a variety of them. The most important one is probably our leaders, who are highly polarized themselves and stoke that polarization to be able to get elected or to think that they could get elected. But another source is, and you may see this in your own lives, is that people are drifting away in their friendship groups from friends who are of the other party. Discussions are more difficult there. When I was teaching some years ago, I would always tell my students, this was on the eve of Thanksgiving, when classes were canceled the last 2 days of the week. I would say, well, okay, I recognize that you're not going to be attending class on Wednesday. even though you could, I'll be here. But I'm gonna cancel class on one condition. You need to go home for Thanksgiving dinner and talk to people at the table about partisan politics. And I could see the anguished looks on their faces. And then there was a fessing up time when they came back on Monday. I would say, well, how many of you did this? And heads go down, downcast looks, because Uncle John was in the room at the table and they didn't want to raise politics there and get all kinds of disagreement within their family. So polarization is very high. I think I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. It's destroyed friendships. It's destroyed marriages. It's destroyed relationships between children and their parents. I have a friend who was so opposed to his daughter marrying someone of the other party that he decided not to even attend the wedding. So that is deep polarization. He was right, by the way. No. But we have a case of balance, which means that little things in an election campaign can change the result. And indeed have changed the result. What are the little things? Millions of dollars spent on behalf of one candidate or the other, scandals of one kind or another, selection of running mates who don't turn out to be very strong running mates, just a whole variety of things can really matter. And so it's hard from that to derive or deduce any kind of a mandate. But nonetheless, as I said before, candidates indeed, winning candidates claim a mandate. Party identifications are so balanced that there is powerful incentive for the parties to rig the rules and rig the rules in their favor. One of them we're seeing right now in Texas, California, and soon to be the case in Ohio, is redistricting. And by redistricting, of course, you can change in the 25 seats that are available to be redistricted, and it's only about that number of seats. You can find that it changes the balance of power in the House or the Senate. Dialing back, by the way, to November of 2024, the Republicans won, of course, majorities in both the House and the Senate, but they were bare majorities. And had votes changed even for those kinds of races in various districts around the country, you would have seen a different result. And think about how much it would have mattered if President Trump, instead of being faced with party control of the House and the Senate in Washington, faced either one oppositional House or both of them in opposition. None of the things that have been done in the past year, or at least almost none of them, would have been done. And that was again dependent upon just a very small margin of control in both the House and the Senate. And then also along with that are efforts to try to ramp up turnout of people on your side of the aisle and hold down the turnout of the opposition. And there are various ways, time-honored ways. This has been going on for years and years and years. When I first began studying electoral politics, the registration rate in the state of Mississippi for Blacks was 3%. 3%. And there's a famous picture that was in one of the textbooks at the time of the sheriff of a county in Alabama sitting in the doorway to his office with his legs stretched out, daring any Black in the county who wanted to come to register to step over him and come in and register. And in that particular county, nobody did. And so attempts to try to control turnout are legion. And parties and elected officials come out with different ways of doing that. The way that I think is most common in Ohio is by purging the voter rolls of people who haven't voted in recent elections. And the presumption there is that these are usually minority voters. Voters on the other side. You don't want to purge from the electorate voters who are likely to vote for you, though that could be done. I think Ohio has changed its rules somewhat there. It used to be that you had to notify voters if they had been purged. Now I don't think you have to. anymore. And of course, many of these voters I call them voters, many of these people are people who have moved around a lot. And so even if you were to send them a letter, it wouldn't get to them in time for them to re-register to be able to vote in that particular election. Qualifications for voting have been stiffened in some countries or some counties, some states. One of them that has, I think, fallen by the wayside to some degree has been proof of citizenship. Although you read about that from time to time cropping up again in a particular state. Now, who among us carries proof of citizenship? A passport maybe, but some states don't allow that. If you have a military ID, that counts in the states that demand proof of citizenship. But think about the 80-year-old Black woman from Alabama who doesn't even have a birth certificate because she wasn't born in a hospital. They didn't allow Blacks into the hospitals in Alabama in that period of time. So there are all of these attempts to try to trim the electorate in such a way that it's suitable, supportive of your party. And the incentive to do that is even greater today than it used to be because things are so tightly balanced between Democrats and Republicans. All of this is to say, as I say, I guess it's going right now, but on the slide from before, elections matter. And elections matter in important ways. Not most American, well, not every American believes that. Our turnout rates in comparison with those in other countries are pretty low, actually. They've gone up in recent years, but they're now for midterm elections like the one coming up here, they were in the 50 to 60% range. That means 40 to 30% of voters, or 40 to 50% of voters, potential voters, are not voting in those elections. And of course, it matters who is voting and who is not in these partisan cases. Yeah, I want to spend some time, talking about the Trump era changes. What's happened in the last 8 months? Not a very long period of time, though it seems like a long period of time because a lot of action has taken place. Trump has appointed to the cabinet departments, the top political positions, policymaking positions in those departments, all of which, or almost all of which, require Senate confirmation. And virtually all of those confirmations have taken place. The Senate has voted by very narrow margins to confirm some candidates who, at least in my judgment, are absolutely unqualified for the position, but nonetheless, they've gone ahead and done that. Every once in a while, they're too embarrassed to do that, and so they will force a candidate to withdraw from the nomination or force the White House to withdraw that nomination and stuff. But that really hasn't happened very often. This includes federal judges. There are over 900 of them. Trump, as it turns out, has appointed, and they've been confirmed in almost half the cases. So we're talking about a federal judiciary that is now and is soon to be majority Republican. It's already there, actually. And of course, these are lifetime appointments. So they really matter over a period of time. The other thing that's happened here, and this is in violation of the norms, previous presidents, by and large, have held over career civil servants and not dismissed them. And in fact, there's some question that's being litigated right now as to whether they can dismiss them in certain agencies and departments. Doge, remember Doge? Tried to dismiss them. That, it turned out, was ruled by many of the courts to be illegal, that they didn't have the power to do that, but the president did. And so there's been a lot of movement in the higher levels of the executive branch to change who is in these important positions, even if they are not Senate confirmed positions. And that really changes the nature of the federal bureaucracy and changes it from one that is more or less neutral, at least in my view, not everybody's view, but in my view, more or less neutral and professional, to one that is acting in a very partisan way. And that's been very, very important. Some of them are always changed to follow the party that is in the presidency and the White House. And that's true of federal prosecutors in the various districts around the country. I think there are about 100 of them. Those have been in time immemorial, partisan appointments, and they still are. But in the past, many presidents would leave those positions untouched, regarding or relying on the professionalism of the person who was the federal prosecutor in that particular district. That's not true this time. DOJ also still, but even more actively in previous months, has been downsizing most of the departments, has been sending people letters of dismissal or emails of dismissal. In some departments of the executive branch, over half of the people have been dismissed. And then it turns out they need them. And so a letter goes out or an email goes out saying, hey, why don't you come back to work? Because we need to be able to process all these income tax filings that have come in. Or we're fighting fires in California and we need you to be able to do this. I think most of the people who have been dismissed are saying, I'm not going to go back. It's too uncertain. I could be dismissed the next day after they no longer need me. So there's been downsizing there. And another way to put that is, and it's not been downsizing just to reduce the numbers. It's been downsizing to change the political character, the partisan character of those particular departments and agencies. Particularly the ones that I want to mention here are the National Institutes of Health. That is the health research arm of the federal government, heavily downsized. People who have worked there for 20 and 30 years, developing vaccines and a variety of other medications are gone. And replaced, if they are replaced at all, by people who have very little expertise, aside from their loyalty to the President of the United States. The National Science Foundation, which has funded a good deal of my research, was cut. I think the budget was cut by 60%. The political science division of it has been eliminated. That's too political. And so I'm not going to go. I'm glad I'm retired. I'm not going to go back there for money. We now, by the way, I'm in a research project that is cross-national, and we're relying more and more on other countries to put up the money that we need to be able to conduct surveys and other studies in those countries, not the US. In fact, one grant here to a colleague of mine at Northwestern was terminated right in the middle of his data collection period. So he had to let go all of the people on his staff who were collecting data. And his university also was, I think, fined $20 million. And so there's no money in the university to be able to fill in what he had lost. NASA has been cut. The Center for Disease Control has been cut, and cut heavily, by the way. USAID has been almost totally eliminated. And I was going to ask him, Tom, maybe this is a question for you. Montagne de Luz receives any federal money at all, or is it all private donations? Or do you know?
I think Doug can speak to it too. The funding now comes through the Global Fund.
Okay.
Yeah, the MDL has never received any federal money,
No.
Okay.
but USAID covered the cost of the medicine in Honduras, and that has all been eliminated.
Yeah, which is probably sitting in the port city.
It's been locked in
Yeah,
storehouses, storerooms.
And of course, this is true all over the world.
Right.
And it's both food and medicine. And the medicines are critical in some of these countries. Some of these countries that could indeed transport diseases to the United States. And the justification early on to get federal funding, to get Congress to approve this, was that we're protecting the US as much as we're protecting people in these other countries. And I can go on here, and the numbers change over time in terms of what percentage of an agency has been cut, whose employees have been furloughed there. And these are basically small amounts of money in terms of the federal budget, but they still are necessary amounts to be able to carry on the functions of those activities. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the One Big Beautiful Budget Act, which you may recall hearing about before. It's now passed into law. It, by the way, covers only the current fiscal year, which means through September 30th of 2025. That's how far behind Congress was in budgeting these funds. Starting October 1 of 2025, there'll be work on a new budget. And the new budget will be based on the old budget, which has been cut fairly substantially, particularly in domestic programs, less so in national defense, for example. In fact, the national defense budget has increased over last year's, but the domestic agency budgets have been cut, and cut in some cases really, really dramatically. There are several elements of that that are important. There's been a $5 trillion cut in taxes, which means a $5 trillion cut in federal revenue, okay? It includes a permanent extension of the 2017 Trump era tax cuts that were balanced more in favor of wealthy individuals and businesses than they were in terms of middle-class Americans. They've been extended, and they've been extended permanently, not just for a short period of time. There's been a permanent rise in the exemptions for estate and gift taxes, which most middle-class people don't pay much in those, but the rich certainly do. And we're talking about savings, in their case, of millions of dollars. I saw a figure for Elon Musk at one point, and I think he saved over $1 billion in those extensions. There have been permanent cuts in US-based international businesses and an elimination of double taxation where they were taxed by the country where they were hosted, as well as the United States. There has been an increase in R&D expenditures that can be exempted from taxes. So there's been a business side to this as well in the One Big Beautiful Budget Act. There's been a short-term increase in what is called the SALT exemption. SALT is state and local taxes. People in New Jersey and New York and California in particular, and soon to be in Ohio, have been benefited by that because as the tax rate or as the valuation of your property increased over time, you were paying higher property taxes for that. And in New York and California in particular, those rises were terrific. And a certain amount of that is exempted. I think the figure was maybe $10,000, but beyond that, the bite was pretty heavy. And legislators from those states demanded that SALT tax exemption be increased over time. And they were able to get that as a condition for passing the Big Beautiful Budget Act. There's been a 4-year exemption, much talked about, on overtime pay and on tips. And if you think about it for a bit, overtime pay has been going down in the United States, so it's not as big a deal as it used to be. Tips are very hard to monitor. How do you really know how big a tip has been? Now, it turns up sometimes on charge slips, of course, but at other times it's just paid in cash. And people probably haven't reported it in the past. Well, now they don't have to, at least for the next 4 years. And after that, it is limited, it's eliminated, basically. And then there have been cuts in the tax credits, which were Biden-era tax credits for green energy generally, for various kinds of environmental programs, for, I guess, solar power, for wind power, and a variety of other things there. And they've been almost eliminated. So no longer can you take them off your taxes as an exemption. And there also have been cuts in the credit you get for paying healthcare premiums. And that's something that's going to impact, I think, most of us over time. You still can declare them as exemptions, but not as much as you could in the past. Now, the Republican leadership, when they crafted that big, beautiful bill, was very clever. Because what they did was they allowed the tax cuts to take place almost immediately. So these are on, in some cases, for businesses, for example, they're already taking them this year. But they certainly will be taking them next year. The spending cuts for the domestic programs don't really kick in until 2026, after the election itself. And so it was very clever of them to try to disguise the damage that's going to be imposed on certain people, and make sure that the advantages of this bill were seen by other people. So $5 trillion cut in taxes and hence in revenue to the federal government, a $1 billion cut in spending. Now, why is it only 1 billion? It's because the defense budget has grown over time, as has the budget for Homeland Security and a few other enforcement agencies within the federal government. And in terms of the cuts in spending, mostly, as I said before, for international aid, savage cuts there. Also for Medicaid, those don't take place until 2026. But 17 million people or more will lose their coverage under Medicaid. And then there are added work requirements, very bureaucratic requirements, where people have to report their work status. I think in Ohio, it's probably once a month. And there's a lot of red tape involved there. Other social safety net programs have been cut as well. And Medicare for most aliens has been cut. Now, the difference between aliens here for Medicare and Medicaid programs is that these aliens, by and large, have paid into Medicare. They're not going to get it back. And so they won't be qualified for it anymore. And the implication of that is that, and we read a lot about this, is that rural hospitals that operate on a very slender margin are going to close down because they're very dependent, particularly on Medicaid spending. And it means that a lot of people are going to show up at the emergency rooms here at Riverside or Ohio State Wexner, who have to be served. And the cost of serving them is going to be passed on to those who have insurance. And, because the cost, I don't know if you've seen your bills recently for hospitalization. These are not insubstantial amounts of money. And those costs have to be covered by these hospitals. And so somebody else is going to have to make up the difference. Or they will cut staff, which they're, I think, not going to do. So that's what's happened already. The federal budget deficit has grown as a result of that particular bill by an additional $3 to $4 trillion. It's not clear yet how much, but it's a substantial amount. Our debt has grown. The debt is the recurrent deficit added each year. That has grown to $37 trillion. Substantial amount of growth. Most of the growth, by the way, interestingly, coming under Republican presidents. The last president to balance the budget was Bill Clinton back in his first term. The other thing that has gone, I think, unnoticed is that the fiscal year 26 budget, which is for October 1 of 2025 all the way through to September 30th of 2026, that particular budget will enact further spending cuts. And there'll be spending cuts from a base that was set by this particular budget this year. And that particular budget is due on October 1st of 2025, 2026, but it won't be even talked about until we get into the early months of 2026. And probably there will be another threat of government shutdown because the parties can't agree on what ought to be in that budget. The Trump administration, as I think I told you before, added 476 judges to the federal courts. These are lifetime appointments out of slightly over 900 total judges. So it's more than half the judiciary. The Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and Education have become especially politicized. And you can see this not only in who is appointed as their cabinet director, but also people who are in the positions near the top that are policymaking positions. Federal troops, as we're hearing in the last few days, both regular troops and reserve troops have been sent to U.S. cities to fight crime, quote, end quote. And so far it's DC and of course Los Angeles. Before that, the talk now is that Chicago will be next. Columbus has a higher crime rate than Chicago does. Will we be next in line? You know, who knows? And of course, the main function of these troops is to detain immigrants. And we've set up camps to house immigrants who have been picked up off the streets or wherever they are. And we're talking about, I think, hundreds of thousands of people by now. How long those camps are going to be in operation is hard to know. I suspect as long as the Trump administration has been in power. And of course, there have been a lot of immigrants who have self-imposed immigration. They've left to go home because they are worried that they're going to be picked up. These are not necessarily people who are not citizens, because the dragnet has been widespread. And if you think about it, how do you know, if you're an ICE agent, who is an illegal immigrant and who is not? You just go to Home Depot and arrest everybody who looks like they might be an immigrant in the parking lot, haul them away, don't even check their credentials to see if they can prove their citizenship, which is not always easy to do. Most of us don't carry our birth certificates with us or our passports. So it's pretty hard for us on demand to present our documentation. I haven't talked much about tariffs. We're still in the middle of the period where these tariffs are being imposed. They're being imposed at various levels, depending on the day and depending on the country. We will see what happens to those. I think it's very clear, except to maybe the most important people who are the ones that are legislating the tariffs, that the tariffs are paid by us. They're taxes on us. They're taxes that are paid by whoever picks up the goods at the ports and then passed on in many cases to people who are consumers, who are customers of those businesses. Many of them are vague. Many of these tariffs are under negotiation still. Trump is very much a president who is a transactionalist, and he's trying to cut a deal here, and there are various things that he wants. If the country concedes to those, he may lower the tariff or simply not impose it at that point. There are fines, as we have seen on DEI programs, both in the public schools as well, and in the private schools as well, and in universities and colleges, under the guise mostly of protecting Jews from anti-Semitic actions. And those, I think, have been continued, and in some cases have been very, very substantial. Okay, let me try to wind this up. I wanted to talk a little bit about why so many voters and Republican politicians support Trump. It's a question I've wrestled with for a long time. I suspect many of you have as well. And there may be several reasons for that. And what I want to talk about are those reasons. One is that there's some people who are very much attracted to Trump himself, both the man and his style of governing. Some of them like him because he's forceful, because he is quite willing to bully the opposition. I think that's not most Americans, but there's some people who would fall into that category. He doesn't, by the way, bully people like Vladimir Putin, because like most bullies, he picks on those who can't defend themselves very well. He's also a transactional deal maker. His decisions are often not rooted in values, certainly not in Christian values as we would recognize them, but rather what he can get in return for what he is doing. And then there is a large element of personal aggrandizement for money for himself and his businesses, for presidential power, for a diminished rule of law. There's an interesting divergence here between Republican policies, favored Republican policies, and Trump policies. And very quickly, I want to just end up by talking about the divergences. Trump policies are to impose trade barriers, which was never something the Republican Party wanted to do. They were for lower tariffs. They were not engaged in the dismantling of universities. The biggest friends of the universities, as Ohio State presidents can tell you, were Republicans in the state legislatures, not Democrats. Not that Democrats were opposed necessarily. And of course, Republicans were very much inclined to alliances with foreign countries, with our allies, and to supporting that. There also is, and I think it's very prominent, a fear of opposition by both voters and especially politicians in primaries and general elections. A majority of Republicans who now serve in Congress were elected to those positions when Trump was president, or even in this interlude between his first and second presidency. And they're very much afraid of him coming out in opposition to them. Well, let me end on that point and invite questions in the time that we have left. I recognize, and Tom tells me that this is a little fast, I think, maybe not. But anyway, if you have questions, please do indeed raise them, and I will attempt to answer them. Yes, sir.
We have a little bit off your topic. We've heard probably about populist candidates, maybe since William Jennings Bryan in 1896. And I know in recent years, we've heard about presidents like Barack Obama and Donald Trump as being populist candidates. Is compared to traditionally, is that true, or is that, how about?
I think that Trump has captured the populist mantle. Populists, I think, cut down to their bare minimum, were people who were opposed to the establishment, whatever that establishment was. Trump campaigned that way. Remember his attacks on the deep state, for example. He's not governed that way. He's governed in favor of people who are better off rather than worse off. And a lot of people who have been supporting him for that reason, and no, not for that reason, because they thought he was attacking the establishment, have pulled away from him, but most of them have not.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on the Chase Center at Ohio State that's under development? Why have they created Chase Center, which interestingly enough promotes diversity of thought? And I thought we were to get away from diversity. Your comments.
Well, I think the charge has been, and the Chase Center now is real.
Okay.
The charge has been that faculty particularly, but students as well, who've been brainwashed, of course, by their faculty, have been very hostile towards conservative views. This charge has been led by people in our state legislature. Some faculty have been making that claim as well. Political science, which is my own discipline, has been very conscious of that. And most political scientists, I think, are very balanced in what they do in the classroom. But you wouldn't know that from listening to the charges there. The danger of the Chase Center is that the normal mechanisms for rewarding and promoting faculty are exempt. No longer will faculty be judged by peer review in their departments or by their students for that matter. And they now will be determined for promotion and tenure by central administration, which is very conscious that the legislature is looking over their shoulder there. So I think it's not a good thing. Whether it will be handled in a responsible manner by the people who are in charge, the appointed director of the Chase senator appears to be somebody who's quite even-handed. So we'll see. But I think it's a dangerous intrusion on what traditionally has been the prerogative of senior faculty and deans and department chairs and the like. Yes, go ahead.
My question is, where is the money going on political campaigns? We saw Trump come up out of nowhere, but basically by using Twitter, by using calls into Fox News, getting all this free publicity, and he came out of nowhere in 2016, had very little campaign organization. He changed campaign managers 3 or 4 times. But now there's billions of dollars. Last year, Kamala Harris spent $1 billion.
Yeah.
With the decline in TV advertising having impacts, where's all the money going?
Well, it's going to the campaigns, but not directly to the campaigns, because the interesting secret about campaign funding is that political candidates get discounts on TV advertising. They pay the lowest rates that are available. If it's a political action committee, on the other hand, they pay whatever the prevailing rate may be. And so they pay what Kroger pays or what any other advertiser pays. Yet, because political action committee money can't be traced easily, most people prefer to give their money to these political action committees. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, with individual donors being able to give money without any disclosure of who they are and how much they've given.
But what are they spending it on?
They spend it on television advertising, which has been heavy. They spend it on door-to-door activities. They pay campaign workers, not volunteers necessarily. There are organizations, political action committees, and other political committees that are hiring people to go door to door. I had a student who was hired by one of those organizations, and I said, "Well, why are you working there?" He said, "They pay me double what they paid me when I was working on the other side." And he didn't care what side he was on. He was very interested in earning an income. Well, I think we should stop. You need to get, I know, to church. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting.